Okay, so are we ready? Let us begin. Okay. Okay, so chapter one is all about the major themes of anatomy and physiology. We talked about the system of sensation, sensing a deviation in homeostasis. How do you make this disappear? Okay. All right. So we talked about multiple themes that keep happening, multiple themes that are repeating in restoring homeostasis, restoring a deviation in homeostatic variables. We said we have multiple different variables. We have, for example, glycemia, and that could deviate upward, like we have hyperglycemia, or deviate downward, and that will lead to hypoglycemia. We talked about calcium levels. We can have a homeostatic calcium level that goes upward from upward to hypercalcemia, or downward to hypercalcemia, and that is a problem because we don't want hyper or hypo. We want homeostatic range U. So let's talk about just a quick review of what we have done so far, and that is we have outlined the difference between anatomy and physiology, and we said that anatomy is the study of the structure, while physiology is the study of the function. And we examine the structure of the human body by inspection. So we inspect, we look. Is there redness? Is there swelling? Is there a change in the tissue architecture? And then palpation is when we feel and palpate with our hands. We feel the structure with our hand. We feel if there is a change in the temperature. We feel if there is a we palpate if the heartbeat. We palpate if there is a pulse. And then there's auscultation, where we use a stethoscope to listen to the heart sounds, and we listen to the other sounds of the body, listen to the lungs. And then we do percussion, and that is tapping on the body to feel the resistance and to listen to the emitted sound for abnormalities. So, what can percussion lead to? Percussion can lead to us finding out that there is an egregious increase in the size of the spleen, known as splenomegaly. So now the spleen has increased in size, or maybe there's an increase in the liver size, egregious, dangerous increase in the size of the liver, known as hepatomegaly. So that could be detected by percussion. This was back in the day, but now they rarely do that, except in a very brief physical examination. Alternatively, what do? Imaging. They do diagnostics. They do imaging, but they also, in order to detect an increase in the size, like splenomegaly or hepatomegaly, they do ultrasound. Ultrasound. Then there's dissection. Dissection is the cutting and the separating of the human body tissues to reveal the tissue relationship using a cadaver, a dead body. So back in the day, they used to do the experiments on living prisoners, on slaves. So later on, themselves, they got to the point that this was unethical. So now they said a prisoner is only responsible for the punishment of the crime that they have committed. They should not be used or abused for science purposes. And then they said the same thing goes also for slaves. And then after that, they banned completely any work on humans, whether alive or dead, and they resorted to animals. That's where they thought that in the old textbooks they used to think that the liver of the human being resembles the liver of the monkey, which has like finger-like projections, and that turned out to be not true. And science at the time was full of much superstition, saying, bad blood. If you're sick, you have bad blood. We should remove bad blood from you. And sometimes they thought taking in the blood of the lion makes you strong like the lion. And all of that nonsense later on proved to be not true. Although there is some little bit of truth. Like, for example, in hypercoagulability. That's bad blood. They treat that how? By removing the blood. So some of the concepts remain are still true, but most of them obviously are wrong. And there is his anatomy could be at the level of macrostructure. There is a gross anatomy. That's when you study at the micro level. And then there is histology, which is still anatomy, but at the level of the microcosm. So remember, we talked about the reductionist theory. So now they learn that it's not all about the big organs, it's about the cells. So we cannot study the cells with the eye. That's why we need a microscope. So the anatomy using a microscope, that is known as histology, a separate field. And they do also comparative anatomy, and that is you study multiple species to learn about form and function and evolution. And then they learn that in the past they learned that there is a common ancestor between humans and chimpanzees. And raise your hand if you think that the evolution theory says that we evolved from monkeys, from chimpanzees that are great grandfathers, and we come down from the lineage of monkeys and chimpanzees. Do you think that? Do you think that's what the theory says? Yeah. No. Did the theory says that we come down from monkeys?
Oh no, come down from.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, that's what many people think. Yeah, but
resemblance and stuff.
yeah, it says excellent. It says that there is a lot of DNA. In fact, human beings and chimpanzees have a lot in common in their DNA than chimpanzees and gorillas. So the chimpanzee, so that's why they are perfect model, the chimpanzee, for medications. So most of the medications that we take, if they are run on the chimpanzee, they give you the closest result. That it's almost like you are running it on a human being. Okay. Due to the resemblance in the DNA, but it does not mean we evolved from monkeys, that they were monkeys and from them you had a human being that looks a little bit like a monkey. That's not true. And then we gotta learn that there's a exploratory surgery. That's when they open the body to see what's wrong. Well, they don't do that anymore, but it's not entirely eliminated because there is endoscopy. That's a surgery. There is endoscopy, there is colonoscopy, and there is catheterization. So we do use surgical intervention for diagnostics, for diagnostics. But this endoscopy is not just based on diagnostic. It could also perform an action, so removing the polyp from your colon and taking a biopsy. That's also very important. Then radiology is the branch of medicine specializing in just imaging. Being able to use the chemistry and the nuclear chemistry to be able to see the changing in body architecture, body structure, to see that if there are new cancers that appear or things of that sort. So we talked about gross anatomy. That's when you study the things that can be seen with the naked eye. Histology is when you examine things that are only with a microscope. Then there's histopathology, and that is the microscopic examination of tissues for signs of the disease. So here we are examining with the intent of finding out signs of disease. Then there's cytology, and that's the studies of the cell. So now you are limited not to the tissue, not to the organ, but to the actual cell. So physiology uses methods of experimental science. So there are subdivisions of physiology, and that is neurophysiology. That's when you study the function of the neurons. That's it, nothing else. Endocrinology is when you study the physiology of the hormones. We have already mentioned two hormones preparing for us calcium and two hormones preparing for us glycemic index, repairing for us hyperglycemia and hypoglycemia. And we also had enzymes that repair for us hypercalcemia and hypocalcemia. Who can remember for me the enzymes that repair for us hyperglycemia and the enzyme that repair for and the hormone that repairs for us hypoglycemia? So for hyperglycemia, who? Insulin, excellent. And for hypoglycemia, it's who? Glucagon, excellent. Okay, and for calcium, so hypercalcemia is repaired by which hormone? Calcitonin, very good. And which hormone repairs for us excessive, excessive drop in calcium, like hypocalcemia? Parathyroid hormone. Excellent. Pathophysiology is when you study the mechanisms of action that lead to the development of disease. Then there's comparative physiology. What is comparative physiology? Comparative physiology is the study of different species to learn about the body function. These are the basis for much of our understanding of human physiology and the development of new drugs. Okay, so the Hippocratic Oath is very important because this shows that the father of medicine is Hippocrates. And the reason why, is that how you say his name? Hippocrates. Well, how do you say his name?
Hippocrates, that's what I.
Hippocrates. Hippocrates. So he wasn't a hypocrite. Hippocrates. I was calling him a hypocrite all the time. Well, you see, sometimes you learn from your students. So it's hypocrites. Melissa says. Hypocrites. How do you say it? Hippocrates. Hippocrates. Oh, poor guy, he wasn't a hypocrite.
Same when you speak another language.
Yeah. Yeah, you always have to look for those who are native language speakers. Okay. Okay, so he urged physicians, because remember back in the day, disease was about, is the demon, is the gods, they're not happy with you, and and some of that is a little bit true. Yeah, I believe, if you go into the haunted house and you come out, I think you're gonna come out sick, I promise. Okay? If you go to like the abandoned place in the desert where nobody is around, or if you go to like the beach in the winter where nobody is there and you just stay there for overnight, I guarantee you're gonna have a trip to the emergency room.
Yeah, level of stress.
Okay, if that's how you think of it. But anyways, Hippocrates said that is not about that. Let's look for the natural scientific causes of the disease. You can believe in what you want, but we still have to come down to a fair common ground where we can have an experimental design. So Aristotle believed that diseases had supernatural or physical causes, so called supernatural causes of disease, and they're called natural causes. I believe in that. I believe in the science, but I also do believe that there are some dimensions that influence the progression of the disease that are untestable. by scientific hypothesis or by scientific experimental design. Their believed complex structures were built from simpler parts. Okay, so here's where Metrodora comes in. So Metrodora is a Greek physician, and she was the first woman to publish a medical textbook. What was it about? Yeah, obstetrics and gynecology. Okay. And then there was Claudius Galen. He was the physician to the gladiators. So when they go and they fight and they punch each other in the face and they're bleeding, so they go to him and he takes sample of this and sample of that, and he's looking at the pus and he's looking at blood. And actually he came up with many ideas that he noticed and the ways to treat these gladiators when they fight and when they do that kind of stuff. And then he did animal dissections because the use of cadavers, you see now they have developed ethically and they said, we cannot use on living human beings. But then they even banned it for even dead. But then they switched back in the later ages and they said, okay, not to do it on any living human being, but the dead, we can use their bodies and so on. So the teachings were adopted as dogma in Europe in the Middle Ages. Okay. Then there was Maimonides, the hospital Maimonides. So these are the famous figures. And then there is the Avicenna. He was, yeah, Moses bin Maimon. He was a Jewish scholar. So there was a time where in Christendom, the whole entire this is where the Greek were. That was in the Roman Catholic, and then there was a Protestant. That's where the church was. So that is where the regulation of you cannot do science on experiments on the living or the dead and attributing things to demons and all of that. But in the Jewish part of the world and the Muslim part of the world, it wasn't bad. So they were actually doing a lot of experiments, and then they have moved on, and they like this book, the canon of medicine. Actually, the translation is wrong. The canon, it wasn't a canon. It was the law of medicine. The word canon means law in the Arabic language. So his name of his book was The Law of Medicine, which is very interesting because people think law is one thing. You go to law school, and then medicine is another thing. But he combined both. He said the law of medicine, that medicine is a law. And I believe that because the same way in the law, if you do this, if you do a robbery, then you have to serve this sentence. If you do a homicide, you have to serve this sentence. With disease, if you have this disease, you have to get this corresponding dose of antibiotic. So it's very similar, okay, in terms of being law and cut off. Okay. And then we move on to Andreas Vesalius, and he published the first atlas of the anatomy. You don't have to, this is just for you to appreciate. No exam question is going to ask you what book Metrodora wrote. And, William Harvey is very important because we're going to see him. If you take the course with me next semester, we're going to talk about his discovery of the valves. He had a very interesting experiment on the valves of the blood vessels, and where if you press on two regions, I'll show you the experiment. You will see that the blood cannot move forward. It only refluxes backward, indicating that there are passageways that have been blocked. So he was able to show that these blood vessels, they are not just empty tubes. They have gates inside them, allowing passage in one way direction, preventing passage in the other way. That's how we have varicose vein for people who stand all the time, like professors, standing all the time, and teachers and nurses and who else stands all the time? If you stand up all the time, like soldiers or police or the uh, yeah, these guards. If you stand a lot, blood is gonna pool, it's gonna fall back. So now it's gonna start so there will be damage and defect in these gates, and then the blood is gonna reflux backward and it's gonna fall to the bottom of your blood vessels, leading to to engorgement of the blood vessels. Then there was Galileo. He was a physicist, and he discovered the telescope. He put two lenses, one close to the eye, known as the ocular lens. Okay, very obvious, close to the eye, ocular, far from the eye, and that's the objective lens. And then they made us, that was for the telescope to see the stars very far, but they developed the same idea to see the things that are really small. It's very interesting how we have more information about the universe, we have more information about the galaxy than we have about our own brain. So we need to do a lot more research. Our brain is more complicated and more intricate, more intertwined than the universe. This 1 pound and a half, this 1 pound and a half of brain pudding, and it looks like pudding. So this nerve tissue that looks like pudding, it is very interesting. For most people, it's about 1.5 pounds. Except my brother says, except it's my head, it's about 10 pounds. Some people have very big, some people have very big heads. My brother says my head is huge. Anyways, Robert Hooke. Robert Hooke says, Robert Hooke was able, it's very interesting. The microscope was developed by Galileo, but it was Robert Hooke. And then there was someone who came after him known as Leeuwenhoek. They have done more and accomplished more with the microscope than the one who actually invented it.
He just put the lens. They actually did the valve.
Yeah, so it takes a long time for things to happen. It takes a long time to develop the microscope. It takes a long time to do the experiments, and it takes even longer time to. So now we have moved on from the microscope to the electric microscope. I mean, that shows really, really tiny things. That's Hooke's compound microscope. So this is Van Leeuwenhoek, who developed the microscope some more, and then there was the beginning of the cell theory. This is very important. This is where now we are responsible. So now there's no longer entertainment, and we're just learning about Metrodora, and we're learning about all that. Now this is serious business. So cells, in the reductionist theory, we begin with cells. So cells, so usually the foundation is always at the bottom. So many people think the most important thing is always at the top. That's not true. The most important thing is always in the bottom. That's why they call it the foundation. You see, this table, it has 4 legs. If one leg is not there, the whole table from the top is going to fall. So that's why I'm telling you this course, anatomy and physiology, it's the foundation. If it's very strong, it's like a tree. If the tree has really deep roots, the hurricane is never going to take it off. You know, I saw a picture during the hurricane. It's interesting. A big tree was broken, and a small tree was able to like survive the hurricane. And then they looked that the roots are really deep. So if you want to go far in your nursing career, begin like your first year of nursing school, these courses intensify and learn a lot, because if you have a strong foundation, everything will build up easily. But if your foundation is weak, the anatomy and physiology is weak, then all the pharmacology and the pathology is going to fall back on it. So is the cell is the basic unit. Above the cell comes many cells give us tissue. And above the tissue, we have an organ. Then association of organs, we have organ systems that communicate with each other. Then we have the organism. Now they said there is even something below the cell, and that is what's inside the cell. So now the cell is the least meaningful thing. If you break the cell, you're not going to have anything meaningful. But we still need to know the things that are inside the cell, because we can repair the cell by repairing them. So inside the cell, what do we have? We have atoms, we have molecules, we have atoms, we have molecules, and we have organelles. And that's very interesting, because we said that we have the ribosome, and the ribosome is able to translate for us mRNA into protein, right? Convert mRNA into protein. And the atoms are there to influence for us what's happening. So maybe we can inject the cell with some molecules that can help the cell survive. Because the cell survives, tissue survives, organs survive, organ system survive, organism respond, survive. So now they change their mind and they said, even though these things on their own, the atoms on their own, the molecules on their own, the organelles, the Golgi body, the nucleus, the cytoplasm, on its own, it cannot survive. It's meaningless. But when we study it and we can repair it, then it can do its function and then it can help us, because the action of organelle plus, the Golgi body plus endoplasmic reticulum plus the nucleus plus the cytoplasm plus the mitochondria give us a functioning cell. So that's why we study the organelles to see if we can repair them, to see what proteins are involved in the activity, what proteins are involved in the activity of these molecules, on these organelles. And we will see later on that there are enzymes, phosphorylate, and enzymes that need to be phosphorylated. There are G-coupled proteins. I mean, that is how cancer is trying to be solved. Cancer is not being dealt with at the level of the tissue. It's at the level of inside the cell. What molecule, what receptor went wrong that I can use it? How can I stop this, autophosphorylation that is happening at the receptors of the cells, leading to the development of cancer? So now we don't just limit ourselves at the cell, we go deeper in the cell. Just because on their own they are meaningless, it doesn't mean when they work together they will not give us a cell. So we have a medication that targets an organelle or targets a molecule or an atom, and that is going to help the cell to survive, and then the tissue survives, and then the organ survives, and then the organism survives. Make sense? Okay. So cells can never come except from, you answer this question, I bring you prize next time. Let's see, I give you the big extra credit. Cells can never come except from dot dot dot. DNA. Cells cannot come except from DNA. Cells cannot come except from DNA. The DNA is part of the nucleus. So if I have DNA, but I don't have cytoplasm, can I still be a cell? Can I still be a cell if I have DNA, but I don't have mitochondria? Can I still be a cell? Can I still be a cell if, some viruses, they have some form of, they just have mRNA. They don't have DNA. But when they do the reverse transcriptase and have DNA, are they considered cells? No, they're not cells. So cells can never come except from organelles. So how is that? So that means if I bring together an organelle from here and a nucleus from here and a cytoplasm from here and combine them together, now I'm going to have a cell that's not going to be alive. So I go to one cell, take out the cytoplasm. That's an organelle. The cytoplasm is an organelle. I take the cytoplasm. I take the mitochondria from another cell. Then I take the Golgi body from another cell. Then I take the ribosome from another cell. I have multiple organelles, and I put them all in one artificial cell. Can that cell live? Can that cell survive? No. If I have a functioning cell that has something wrong, you're very close. You're very close, but you're not there. Cells can never come except from. Who said other cells? Both of you said it at the same time? Excellent. Cells can never come except from other cells. That's why we have the cell cycle. So the cell cycle, we go through the M phase, the mitosis. Then we have the G phase, the S phase, and then you go through the G phase, the S phase, and then to the mitosis, and then the cell came from other cells. So you have to have a cell there before, so another cell can birth other cells. The baby came from mom's cells. Even so, you had a sperm, that's a cell, and an egg, that's a cell. Then you have the development of other cells. But cells don't come from nowhere. Cells don't come from air. Okay, very important. So cells come from other cells. Good, 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 and good. You guys are very good. When I was asked this question, I didn't answer it back in college. Maybe my professor wasn't explaining it like I was doing. Anyways, my other student said, "You are getting cocky now." I'm sorry. Okay, so modern biomedical science advances. So now they talk about the germ theory of disease that we talked about that infectious diseases are, all of these bacteria. How they bacteria destroy you? They release toxin, exotoxin, endotoxin, damaging cell membrane, cleaving, breaking the cell membrane, all the lysosomal degradative enzymes spilling out to the tissue, destroying nearby tissue, causing redness, heat, pain, swelling. Then they talked about the mechanisms of heredity, and there's an autosomal disease, and then there's a dominant disease, and then there is a recessive disease, and then there are advances in medical imaging. So now they no longer need to open up your belly to see if your liver is big or not. They can just take a photo. They used to do that back in the day. This is a good time to be alive. But I don't know, because it has its challenges also. So back in the day, 8 p.m., everybody's sleeping. The caveman is sleeping, nobody is up at 11 p.m. So they never need to take medication to sleep. They never need to take melatonin. They never needed to take the anxiety, because when the light is out, everybody's knocked out. Now the light is out, there's artificial lighting. There is, you walk in the street, there's lights. It feels like it's 12 noon. But back in the day, the sunset, everybody's sleeping. The sunrise, everybody up. So they had a very healthy lifestyle. The food they ate was very nutritious, and now we have things that are destroying us. And remember when I told you, when I repaired my phone, it didn't work. Then I gave it to the guy, and my phone was with him for 3 days. It was the best 3 days of my life. I was sleeping nicely. I had, you know, my addiction was like, what's happening on my YouTube channel? What's happening on my Instagram? Did somebody add me? Did I get 1 million subscribers? This is serious psychiatric diseases. So you have to, don't abandon it, but see if you can find the balance. See if you can have the right balance, because obviously putting lectures to the educational community is very important, but you have to be moderate. You can't be like all the time online. You cannot be all the time looking into the LED screen with your lenses and your retina, and that's very dangerous. So you have to regulate that, and your sleep cycle. You have to ensure that you are asleep like 10, 9:30, maximally 11, so that all of the melatonin that is rushing in your body, you get the maximal sleep. There's no night shifts in the back of the day. I mean, back in the day, the caveman never had to worry about working at night. But now people now work in the day, work in the night. So every age comes with its challenges. Um, then they are mapping the human genome to see that this is called evolutionary physiology. So as we change in the time, some diseases come due to the changes that are happening. This technology is made life simple, but also made life very dangerous. So we're always trying to find the balance, the right balance between the benefits and of the technology and maneuvering through the challenges. Okay, now what is the scientific method? The scientific method is the process of performing science, including careful observations, hypothesis, logical thinking, and the proper analysis of observations. So when it comes to science, what do we mean? In science, we have to test testable things. I cannot have an experiment and apply for a peer-reviewed uh, grant because I want to test how much my mom loved me and that kind of stuff. That is untestable. But although we study emotion, but we study emotion by studying the hormones that make you happy, like dopamine, hormones that make you stressed, like epinephrine. That makes sense. But we don't study the hormones that we don't have an experimental design that cannot be proven. Having an experiment about, does God exist? So what is the independent variable? What is the dependent variable? These are things that cannot be put into the scientific method. So always we have to have a hypothesis that is testable, a testable hypothesis. And then there's the inductive method. The inductive method is the process of making multiple observations until you have generalizations and predictions. So, and by the way, this is not just for scientific experimental design with anatomy and physiology. There's psychological research, there's sociological research. They do experiments about inner city impoverished towns and the prevalence of crime. I mean, that's testable. That's testable. This is very, very testable. And then by making observations, I mean, gunshot here, gunshot there, crime here, crime there. That's an observation. That's an observation. Then it leads you to test. You go into these cities and see what is the cause. There's a gang activity. There's this, there's that. So that shows you we have noticed, we have observed multiple things. These multiple observations have led us to formulate a hypothesis. This happens, by the way, to everybody. It doesn't matter who it is. Everybody formulates hypothesis. Your car is not working. Say, is it the battery? Well, it's not starting up. So maybe it's the ignition. Maybe it's the transmission. So everybody goes through, even children, babies. You know, did I put my toy here? No, I did not. Maybe I put it there. So we start to make hypotheses based on what? On observation. So we see things. And sometimes, and that's how people do. Even with rumors, they see somebody got rich all of a sudden. Why did he get rich all of a sudden? He got a new car. He got a new this. He got a new that. So now people observe. So when people observe, they start to make hypotheses. When they make hypotheses, what do they want to do? They, they want to investigate. They want to investigate. They want to find out how that person, this kind of things happen, how that kind of thing happened. So the same thing with experimental design. We make observations, and then based on these observations, we start to formulate a hypothesis that is testable. Once we have established it's a testable hypothesis, then we prepare materials and methods, and then we run the experiment, and based on it, we're able to get data, and then we make a discussion, and then a conclusion, and that journal article could be a stepstone for the next phase of research. So all of the research is based on previous research, and they move on. So we build up research based on induction. Then there is also another method known as the hypothetical deductive method, and that is the most physiological knowledge is gained by this method, and that is where the investigator makes a hypothesis, and the hypothesis was also based. So in induction, we just make observations and predictions, observations and predictions. But in the deductive method, we have um, in the deductive method we have observations, but we make a hypothesis that we put to test. Okay, the concept of falsifiability. If we claim something is scientifically true, we must be able to specify what evidence it would take to prove it wrong. So just because something is true, we need to see that it could also be proven wrong, but it wasn't wrong. So we must run the experiment to investigate that it's wrong, but it wasn't wrong, it's true. So you must be able to falsify. If we claim something is scientifically true, we must be able to specify what evidence it would take to prove that it's wrong. Okay. So what are the elements of the experimental design? There's a sample size where there's a number of subjects in a study. Yes. Mhm. So you need to prove that the reason that the results that you have gotten could not be gotten in any other way. So for example, I have an experiment. In this experiment, I have a pool of subjects. This pool of subjects, I gave them a medication, aspirin, and the aspirin, or maybe an NSAID, or a drug. This drug is able to inhibit the cyclooxygenases, which mediate the pain sensation. I need to give patients in pain who are in pain to give them this NSAID, Advil, Motrin, and other patients who are in pain also give them a capsule full of water or full of sugar. Now I'm falsifying, because if both of them take it and the ones who took the aspirin say I no longer feel pain, and the ones who took the water pill say I still feel pain, now it makes sense because I falsified. So now I made sure that yeah, so that's what you use the placebo for. So I have one group who's suffering from pain. I give them analgesic. So I give them this analgesic anti-pain medication, and they feel that the pain has went down. But other patients who are still in pain, I give them a capsule full of just water or sugar. When they take it, the pain didn't go down. So that proves that, or supports the evidence that aspirin or the Advil are analgesic. But the problem is, if I give them these analgesics and the other group who is also in pain, I give them water, and also their pain went away, so I didn't falsify. Here, it could be that it is something else that is giving me the results. So the pain went down not because of the NSAID, it's because something else. Do you understand what I'm saying? Do you understand what I'm saying? Okay, let me say it one more time. I am testing the effects of an analgesic medication. Let's call it X. I have two groups, group 1 and group 2. And both of them are in pain. Ouch, ouch, both of them are in pain. Group 1, I give them X, a tablet that has X in it. And group 2, I give them a tablet that has water in it, and tell them both take it. When they both take it, if group 1 says that their pain went down, and group 2 says their pain did not change, they are still in pain, that shows you that this X is an effective analgesic. And I did that because I proved that the group who didn't get it are still in pain.
Okay, so the purpose of the falsification is not to say that X is not working, but rather to say that it works with the other stuff.
It says that there is no other route that will get me, there's no other route that will get me to analgesia except X. So I have falsified any other alternative. So there is no other doubt. So let's say there is a crime and there were 3 people there. And I can't just go and choose one person. I have to falsify that the other 2 didn't do it. I have to make sure that the claim, that the induction that the allegation that they have committed it, they didn't. So I have to falsify. Not, I don't just have to prove right. I have to prove that it cannot be wrong. So if I take this X and give it to another group, they will also feel less pain. Give it to group 3, they will feel less pain. And the group who don't have X will never have less pain.
So basically, this works because everything else is fine.
Yeah, yeah. Okay? So the sample size. Sample size is important. Why not? Why is sample size important? Because a medication that was run on 100 subjects and a medication that was run on 1,000 subjects, which one are you more comfortable taking? The 1,000. So that increases the reliability and the validity. So sample size is important. The control is like the treatment group, but it does not receive the treatment. Psychosomatic effects. So sometimes some patients who got the placebo, the water capsule, some of them, their pain went down because they have a psychological state of mind that they are getting the treatment. So this shows you that there is a psychological aspect to treatment. There's also experimental bias, where the experimenter is so eager, the scientist is so eager to get results, they start influencing the subjects. Like me, I'm so eager to make you pass. You're taking the exam, I'm going over there. Hey, click C. Hey, click A. So that's bias because I have a vested interest. So that's the same thing what they realized in the experimental bias, that the experimenter is so excited about drug X. So he may unconsciously or she may unconsciously influence or interfere with the experiment due to the bias that they have. So that is how that's treated with double blind. So the researcher, he doesn't know which group is controlled, he doesn't know which group is placebo. And them, too, the patients, they don't know, tell them, listen, hey, you're placebo, you're just getting water. So now their results, they're going to be perfect as if they received nothing. But you have to make sure that they're blind. And then you test, you see the actual results. So the most important thing you need to know for the exam is how do we solve this experimental bias is when we have double blind. What does double blind mean? The experimenter doesn't know which group is which, and the group themselves, they don't know which group is which. It's not like the experimenter doesn't like that, they don't know who the experimenter is. No, they know who the experimenter is, but neither knows whose group falls where. Then there's statistical testing. Why is statistical testing important? We use statistical tests to provide statements of probability that treatment was effective. So what does that mean? Let's say I took drug X to lower my pain. My pain went down 98 by 2%. Then there is medication Y. When I took it, my pain went down by 10%. I took medication Z, my pain went down 50%. Well, that's a statistical difference. I mean, if my pain went down only by 2%, it wasn't even worth my money or my time. If it went down by 10%, okay, but I wish it was better. If it went down by 40%, it was okay, but I'm looking for more. 50%, my pain now went from 10 to 5. 90%, now that's the one that I want. So we have statistical significance to see that how significant the actual the treatment was. Okay, peer review. So peer review, when I submit my independent variable, my dependent variable, and then when I test my hypothesis, I prove it's falsifiable. I'm not trying to experiment with something that cannot be falsified. And then after that, I must give it to my colleagues. So my colleagues will study it. They are experts in the field. And they will tell me, listen, money has already been spent down this experiment. Go read that paper. Or maybe I don't think it's, there's risk and benefit. You're spending so much money to come up with something, say, no, maybe Or they can say, well, maybe you can add to your experiment, to inquire at the same time, because since you're spending the money, you can hit two birds with one stone. So that's why we have peer review, so you can get counsel. So in life, you don't rely on your intelligence, you rely on counsel. Counsel of who? Counsel of the expert. So if I have a medical condition, okay, I go to the expert, I go to the doctor. I don't go to somebody, to an engineer. But if I have an engineer problem, I don't go to the medical doctor. I go to the engineer. So always have faith and trust the counsel. That's how you're going to succeed. But if you just rely on yourself and you want to repair everything by yourself, then if you rely on your intelligence, intelligence is very deceiving. So you must trust and have faith in the experts. But you have to sure that they are experts. There's a lot of people on YouTube talking about nonsense, you know, peppermint with blah 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 together. You add them together, you're gonna have this, and you're gonna have that, and yeah, some people. So that will only scam the naive people out of their money. So give me money, I will tell you the recipe right now to lose weight. Okay, the recipe is peppermint with nonsense, and then the people go and they actually buy it because they are so desperate. Yeah, and then they will go and do it. And are doing some people they're doing online and like ads on the social media about some pills and they are dangerous. Some of them they are like banned, and they make and they like some companies they go to models and say, you want to lose weight, you want to become like me, take this pill, and they go and they buy it, and then they die, and the model is in trouble too, because she cannot make an ad for something you're not sure of. Okay, so nobody come to me and tell me, hey, make an ad about this, you have many followers, and I go make the ad, and it's a dangerous substance. So just because you didn't know it, yeah, you should investigate. So it's always have to find the expert. Take your knowledge from the expert, not from the social media. Okay, a scientific fact is an information that can be independently verified. The law of the nature is a generalization about the way matter and energy behave, and that results from inductive reasoning and repeated observations. A theory is always talking about multiple things, but a law is always talk about one thing. Yeah, a law is more specific. Very good. Excellent. A law is more specific. Okay, so what is natural selection? We alluded to that. That natural selection, there are pressures that there's stressful pressure that pressure you into acquiring adaptations that help you survive. So somebody who's constantly lifting weights, their body has to adapt to this stress. I mean, he's working as a constructor, always pulling things up, and then the bone is going to start to develop. It's going to get really strong. But somebody who's sitting in the office all day and they are so lazy, their bone is not pressured into acquiring a skill. So they always say adversity and poverty, they teach wisdom. So the people who come from like really poor places in the world, life was hard, they are really smart because they learn adaptation. They learn, but people who have it easy, everything is accessible, everything is that they become lazy and they are not very smart. So that shows you that adaptations, that natural selection, uh, and natural selection happens on population. It doesn't happen overnight. Say, well, last week I had a natural selection, and this no, this happens over years. Years. You have, one population that develops characteristics for reproduction, characteristics for surviving a volcano eruptions. Some people, for example, some people who live up in the mountain, there is very little oxygen. So you see that they have more hemoglobin in their blood. Okay, people who are um, marathon runners. They run a lot, so you see that they have really low heart rate. So your body will always, when you pressure it properly, it will develop the skill. That's why I'm telling you, when you go and you read the book, the more you read it, the more you pressure your mind into developing, into acquiring critical thinking skills, and that's what's gonna make you bright. It's gonna make you very smart. So the one who came up with this idea was Charles Darwin. He said that species originate and they change. So they originate from a common ancestor, but they change through time. So evolution is the change in the genetic composition of the population of the organisms. Is the development of bacteria resistance to antibiotics. Okay, so if I take an antibiotic and I have about 100% bacteria, this antibiotic, let's call it vancomycin. If I give the bacteria vancomycin, about 98% will die and 2% will survive vancomycin. That 2% will develop now, and when they become 100%, next time you take vancomycin, is not going to kill them. Hmm? Resistant, yeah, resistant. Yeah. So it shows you that there's a change in the genetic composition of a population of the organism. Natural selection explains how evolution works and is a selection pressure that forces. These are forces that promote reproductive success of some individuals over the others. So the stronger the predator, it will survive. So the faster the deer can run, it will survive. If it gets older, it gets weaker, they will eat it. Adaptation. These are inherited features, inherited These are inherited features of anatomy and physiology that evolved in response to pressure, to adapt to pressure, and that enable the organism to succeed, like to better camouflage. So if you better camouflage, you hide better, you're able to escape. Okay, so we are primates, and we have, for example, an example of some evolutionary features. Some human anatomical and physiological features can be traced back to ancestral primates. So primates evolved to be arboreal. Arboreal means they are living on the top of the tree because that helped them survive the lion down there. So they escape by staying on the tree or by picking up the orange and the fruits from the top of the tree. So primates have very strong shoulders. They also have prehensile hands, meaning that opposing thumbs, and they are able to grasp things better. And this thumb is the most important thing in our hand. If you cut the thumb, you cannot use your hand. You cannot use it at all to grab it. I mean, imagine you trying to grab something with these four fingers, and I mean using the mouse with the four fingers and um and no thumb. Okay, you see how the monkey, our cousin, is able to, yeah, very close to us. Eh, He's not our father. I mean, it's better. He's not our father, at least. I mean, we used to think he's daddy, but he's grandpa. We used to think he was. I mean, imagine that we evolved from monkeys. I mean, you have a family album pictures, and you ask your mom, "Who's that?" "Oh, that's your dad." "And who's that?" "That's your grandpa." "And who's that? Your monkey?" "That's your great grandpa." That's not how it works. But they are closely related. What is bipedalism? Meaning you're walking on 2 feet. Okay, and that is very favorable to our survival. Okay, because you can spot and look if there is any predators and all that stuff. So this just shows you a record of how many millions of years ago we started to rise and walk our feet and everything. Okay, human structure. So we talked about that. So now we have finally entered into anatomy and physiology. All of that was just entertainment and appreciation of the course. Um, so organisms are composed of organ systems at the top, organ systems, followed by organ systems are composed of organs. Organs are composed of tissues. Tissues are composed of cells. Cells are composed partly of organelles. Organelles are composed of molecules, and molecules are composed of atoms. So that shows you atoms give molecules, molecules give macromolecules, macromolecules give organelles, organelles give the cell, then the tissues, organ, then the organ system, then the organism. The hierarchy of complexity. So the hierarchy of human complexity. The organism is a single, complete individual. The organ system is a group of organs with a unique collective function, for example, circulation, respiration, and digestion. The organ is a structure composed of two or more tissue types that work together to carry out the function. We talked about that. We talked about reductionism. Reductionism is a theory where we study large things based on the building blocks. But holism, we study holistically. These are the emergent properties that occur as we ascend the level of organization from the cell up into the organs. Humans are more than the sum of their parts. So there are no two humans are exactly alike. Even identical twins have their own differences that make them unique. So some individuals lack certain muscles, and some individuals have an anatomical number of vertebrae, and some individuals have an atypical number of certain. So this shows you that what we study in anatomy and physiology, that is true for 70% of the population. Doesn't mean every single human being looks like that from inside. There are some human beings with joint horseshoe kidneys, so their kidneys are touched. Some people are born with 6 fingers. Some people are born with left reversal of organ placement. So what we study shows you there's variation. It's not 100%. So the anatomy and physiology you study, although it's true for the most people, do not be surprised if you meet somebody with differences. Okay? So kidneys look like, you see, that's a normal kidney, but it doesn't mean everybody has a kidney that looks like that. You see, somebody can have a pelvic kidney. A kidney is so low in the pelvis. Another person, horseshoe kidney. Their kidney look like a horseshoe connected. You see somebody with a normal, that's a normal cardiovascular system. There's a variation in the branches of the aorta. Some aorta looks like that. Another one looks like this. Another one looks like that. These are all human beings. So the majority looks normal, but it doesn't mean 100%. There are some variations and differences. Okay. Negative feedback. We've talked about that. Negative feedback. Give an example of it and explain positive feedback. And then we're going to talk about the gradients. That's in diffusion. Okay. So life is a collection of properties that distinguish the living from the non-living. We distinguish the living from the non-living. It is organization, so the living things exhibit a higher level of organization than non-living things. And there's this cellular composition where the living matter is always compartmentalized into one or more cells. And there's metabolism, where the sum of the internal, there is metabolism is converted, is divided into catabolism and anabolism. Catabolism and anabolism. And responsiveness is excitability, which is the ability to sense and react to the changes in the environment. And movement of the entire organism or of substrates within the organism. Okay, so we talked about homeostasis, and that we are always trying to restore some hyperstress or hypostress back into the U region or homeostasis. So we are living in a world of constant stress, but our body is equipped with built-in systems that ensure that we survive. We are always able to repair the hyper back into you and the hypo. But this is not forever. As you get older, those systems deteriorate. Why? Because inside the cell, the DNA gets damaged. It gets damaged with mutations. It gets damaged with ultraviolet radiation, with many stressful physical, chemical stimuli. And we also must appreciate what happens with the telomere. So inside the nucleus, you have the chromosome. So the chromosome, at the end of the chromosome, at the chromosome ends, at the chromosomal ends, in the shoelace, at the bottom of the shoelace, there's like a plastic piece that keeps it from deteriorating and breaking apart. The DNA is the same thing. I'm sorry? Yeah, what is it? Does it have a name? Hmm? Anvil? The what? Anlet, I think it's called. Anlet, yeah. So that thing is like a plastic, it's like a piece of plastic. But the DNA, whenever we are breaking up in cell division, what happens to this part in the end? It gets shorter than before. It gets shorter than before. It gets shorter than before until it disappears. When it disappears, then the cell will commit something called DNA damage response, and then the cell will die with apoptosis, programmed cell death. So the cell has disappeared. If the cell disappeared, there's less DNA. Less DNA, less transcription. Less transcription, less translation. Less translation, less proteins. Less proteins, less biochemical activity. So that's why we are unable to sustain, life at an older age because we have lost so much. What is the name of this terminal part that keeps that saves the DNA from falling apart and then disintegrating? Telomeres. 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 And the enzyme that makes them is called telomerase. Telomerase. This is the enzyme. So cancer. Why do cancer cells able to survive? Because their telomerase is working and regenerating. So when the cancer cell divides, that terminal part does not get shorter like it's supposed to. It gets replaced because they have an ongoing telomerase. But us, our telomerase is not working. It just works one time to make the telomeres, and then it's dead forever. But theirs is active. So whenever the cancer cell divides, its telomerase is able to replace the part that was damaged, and then that it survives. So the cancer cells are able to divide and divide. So it's a battle. So it's a battle. With some people it works, with some people it doesn't. Yeah? Okay. Okay, so physiology is even more variable than anatomy. Okay, so when we talk about values, what's the heart rate? What's the heart pulse? What's the respiratory rate? Are we talking about a 70-year-old male or a 30-year-old male or a 12-year-old male or a 6-year-old male baby? So that shows you that the sex determines, and the age and the diet and the weight, these things are different. So for reference, whenever we're talking about a reference value in physiology, we're talking about a 22-year-old male who is 154 pounds and performs light physical activity and consumes about 2,800 kilocalories a day. And that's the same for the women, except that she's not 154 pounds, she's 128, and she's about 2,000 kilocalories. She eats about 2,000 kilocalories a day. That donut I had was, I think, all of that. I was supposed to have 2,800. That donut was, I think, was 3,000. So you have to be very economical with what you eat, because that 3,000 you ate with a donut, you could have had a big vegetable meal with it. Yeah, keeps you full. Okay, so Claude Bernard was the originator of the internal state of constant internal state of constant internal environment. So we have an external environment, the air that is could be cold, it could be hot, but the internal environment, no matter how cold you are or how hot you are, we talked earlier that if there is hyperthermia, you sweat to return to euthermia. And if it's freezing cold outside, you shiver to return to the euthermia. So it shows you that the internal environment is constant due to the activity of different systems, no matter how the external environment is. It could be too cold outside or too hot, but inside has to be you. Outside could be hyper, outside could be hypo, but inside must remain at you. That's a constant internal environment. So the negative feedback allows for dynamic equilibrium within a limited range around a set point. So the body senses a change and negates or reverses it. There's a loss of homeostatic control that causes the illness or death. So negative feedback and homeostasis. So we said that the internal conditions fluctuate within a limited range. There's a dynamic equilibrium around a set point, and the negative feedback mechanism keeps a variable close to set point. The body senses a change and reverses it. So because feedback mechanisms alter the original changes that triggered them, they are called feedback loops. So we talked about how if it's too warm, the skin blood vessels do what? They vaso. Okay. When it's too hot, what happens to the blood vessels? They vasodilate. And then if it's too cold, the opposite. They vasoconstrict. So this is what I was talking about earlier with the furnace. So with the furnace, what happens is we have a sensor that senses that the room temperature has fell down. So now it's too cold. Then the thermostat activates the furnace, makes it things hot, and then there's a heat output, and then the room temperature jumps up to 20 degrees Celsius, and then the thermostat stops, because if it keeps going, it's going to get even hotter. And then the room cools down, and then the room temperature, and then it cools down to the homeostatic range we want. This is what's happening with the thermostat outside the body. Inside the body, we have these regulatory processes. So you see here in thermoregulation, there's a negative feedback. So what happens is this is the time. You see, remember, we always talked about how time is the independent variable. We cannot change it. But what we change is the temperature. So if you look at the core body temperature, as time goes on, if the temperature, the normal set temperature is 37 degrees Celsius, how healthy we are. If it goes up to 37.5, it's too hot. So we start doing what? Sweating. We start sweating, and we start also vasodilation. And that brings the temperature down to the set point. If the temperature drops to 35 degrees Celsius, 36.5, so now we have went 0.5 below the set U point. What happens is there's vasoconstriction, and the vasoconstriction causes and the shivering, vasoconstriction followed by shivering, and that restores everything back to the set point. Negative feedback and homeostasis. So an example is homeostasis of blood pressure. So there's the baroreflex. That's another variable. I talked to you about hyperglycemia, hypoglycemia, hypercalcemia, hypocalcemia. We also talked about what else? Temperature, hyperthermia, hypothermia. They mentioned in the book blood pressure, hypertension, hypotension, hypertension, hypotension. We don't want hypertension, too much blood pressure. We don't want hypotension, too little blood pressure. We want eutension. We want eutension. So now let's see how your body can repair that. So now, when you rise from bed, the blood drains from the head and the neck, and the blood pressure falls in this region. Why do we say blood perfusion is important? Because blood provides 2 plus and 1 minus. 2 pluses are oxygen, very good. Nutrients, excellent. And the minus takes away what? It gives 2 things, takes away 1 thing. Gives 2 good things, takes away 1 bad thing. It takes CO2 and waste. CO2, metabolic waste that is building up. Okay, so what happens when the blood pressure falls? So this is now we're dealing with hypertension or hypotension. Hypotension. So there's a sensor. So it's detected by the baroreceptors. These are the sensors. And they transmit a sensory input to the integrator center known as the cardiac center of the brainstem. The cardiac center sends out an output, transmits a signal to the heart to increase heart rate. That raises the blood pressure and restores homeostasis. When homeostasis has been achieved, what do? We terminate, we stop. Very good. Okay, baroreflex illustrates the common components of a feedback loop. The receptor is a structure that senses change in the body. For example, the baroreceptor above the heart that monitors the blood pressure. Then there is an integrator, and that is the computer. So the receptor sends the input sensory signal. The integrator center, the process that there's a sensory information that makes a decision and directs the response. For example, a cardiac center of the brainstem. Then the effector. The effector is who mediates the output response. That's the cell or the organ that carries out the final corrective action to restore the homeostasis. For example, the heart. So you rise from bed, the blood drains from the upper, creating homeostatic imbalance. Then that is detected by the baroreceptors. The baroreceptors above the heart respond to drop in the blood pressure. They send to the integrating center, and then the heartbeat accelerates in response to the cardiac center, and that restores. You see, both are equal. Before, one was more than the other. Now both of them are equal, and if the blood pressure rises to normal homeostasis. Okay, feedback, positive feedback, is a self-amplifying cycle. It leads to a greater change in the same direction as opposed to the corrective action. So we begin with a sensation that leads to more. So this is very important for us to understand. And we talked about 2 situations. The childbirth. So the more the baby push against the cervix, the more the uterus will expel the baby out. Also, we talked, there's another example known as blood clotting. So whenever there is blood leakage, platelets will aggregate, and the more platelets aggregate, they invite even more platelets to aggregate like a Band-Aid to stop the bleeding. And making the blood like a thrombus, making like a platelet plug, making like a thrombus. And they generate nerve signals. But it can be very dangerous, positive feedback. If you have a fever that keeps on going on and on and on. So a fever, you have to have a fan, and the fan to bring down the heat, and you also have to have a cold pad. People think fever, you take medication. Medication will stop more heat from going. But how do you stop the heat that's already there and make it go away? Is by putting this, not ice pad, but cold water, and then the hot water is going to go, and then the heat is going to go into that um, heat is going to go from the brain where there's fever into that pad that you put in the forehead. So here what happens is the head of the fetus pushes against the cervix. You see, it's pushing against the cervix. Then the nerve impulses from the cervix are transmitted to the brain. Then the brain stimulates the pituitary gland to secrete oxytocin. Then oxytocin stimulates the uterine contractions and pushes the fetus outward. Same thing with milk. When the baby suckles the milk, those impulses go up to the hypothalamus. Again, oxytocin is again secreted. So oxytocin is a hormone that is secreted twice. Oxytocin is secreted in birth to expel and push the baby out, and oxytocin is secreted in breast milk to cause the milk to come out from the mother. Okay, gradients and flow. So there are differences. So gradient is the difference in the chemical concentration, charge, temperature, or pressure between 2 points. So the blood flows down a pressure gradient from a place of a higher pressure to a place of a lower pressure. We talked about oxygen and air flowing from an area of a high oxygen partial pressure, the lung, to an area of a low partial pressure, the tissue. And the opposite, carbon dioxide moving from an area of a high partial pressure of carbon dioxide, the tissue, that is suffocating and metabolic waste, and is moving to an area of a lower partial pressure of carbon dioxide, the lungs, so it can be exhaled. Same thing with the blood. The blood moves from an area of a high pressure, the heart. The heart has a pump. So the heart is pumping blood. So the most pressure is in the vessels that are closest to the heart, because that's right next to the pump. So the heart is pumping and the blood is gushing out. And it goes to areas that are far away, like your feet and your brain, your lower extremities and your upper extremities, to give them, enrich them with the blood, so they can do the 2+ and the 1-. And heat flows down a thermal gradient from an area of a high heat, like your brain fever, to the pad that you put, to the cold pad, or when you're sweating, from your hot body to the sweat, or from your hot sun into the water, because it has high specific heat capacity. Electrochemicals, a combination of concentration and electrical grade. I'll talk more about that next lecture about diffusion. That's very important. Very important. We'll talk about it next week. But you're going to master it. Don't worry about it. See, any concept I explain to you, you're going to master it. Go home, study some more, and build upon it, and then you are a master of it. Movement in the opposite direction is up the gradient and requires spending metabolic energy. So now if you want to move against the concentration gradient, I'll talk more about that next lecture. So down gradient is easy, like moving downhill. I talked about that earlier, like the waterfall. So the water moves from an area of a higher concentration, a higher elevation, from an area of a higher potential energy to an area of a lower potential energy. And as it's going down, they put a rotor. Inside the rotor, there's a solenoid. Inside the solenoid, there is I can't hear. Inside the solenoid, there is I said earlier. So if you have the waterfall, they put a rotor here, the rotor blades. As the water is coming down, it's spinning the solenoid. And inside the solenoid, what do they have? Who said that? Excellent. Is a magnet. And when you spin the magnet, what do you get? If you put an electric wire in there, what do you get? Electric field. And then from the electric field, you have electric energy. In that electric energy, you can use it as you want. So we had chemical energy that we gained from it, electrical energy, and that electrical energy, we can use it to power things down like a battery. So that's why they have dams, the water dams. So that is down gradient. But you can move uphill. So we're going to learn next week that there are sodium potassium ATPase. Because the ATPase, because it uses ATP, because it's working uphill. So what it does is it takes, so when sodium moves down concentration gradient, it doesn't need a carrier. It just moves down a concentration gradient, like flowing downhill, like that first picture, flowing downhill. But if you're going to take sodium from where there is little sodium and send it back where there is a lot of sodium, it's supposed to be the other way around. Sodium is supposed to move from where there's a lot of sodium to where there's a little bit of sodium. But if you're going to take sodium from where there is a little back to where there's a lot, then you need to pay. You need ATP. And we said the energy currency of the cell is ATP, and we get that by the metabolism of fats through beta oxidation, carbohydrates through glycolysis. Who said that? Excellent, excellent, excellent. And the last one, protein metabolism through protein catabolism. Very good. And then we get ATP, and that's how we provide. So that sodium potassium ATPase is a perfect example of what's happening going uphill. We'll talk more about that next week. So we only meet once a week. Only meet once a week. So you guys have me once a week. So I only have you for just Tuesday. Okay. So you're gonna have to go home and brush on the topics, because usually I have twice a week classes, but you guys are once. So if you leave it in a short-term memory, it's gonna evaporate. So you have to study and to. No, not yet. Study guide is when the exam is closed. And if I put it up, you're not gonna work on it while I'm teaching. Okay, that's disrespectful to me. I'm teaching and you're working on the study guide. Some students, I learned, unfortunately, they try to be economical, and while the lecture is going on, let me work on the study guide, get this work out the way. It's not how it works, because you're gonna be missing on some stuff that I'm gonna test you on while I'm teaching, and I'm also gonna be solving for you the concepts. And as you're paying attention, you're gonna be learning a lot as well. So the study guide, work on it at your private time, but make sure that you get the most out of the lecture. Okay, so this shows you the dietary glucose, a lot of glucose that moves from an area of a lot to less. That's diffusion. Diffusion is based on kinetic energy. So every movement needs energy. So sometimes we use the ATP, that's energy expenditure. We use ATP to move things against their concentration gradient. But down their concentration gradient, we still need energy. We need energy all the time. Without energy, things don't move. But what kind of energy are we using? Are we using kinetic energy? So kinetic energy is when the molecules are bumping to each other, and then they need more space, so they diffuse from an area of a high concentration where it's too crowded to an area of a less concentration where there's a little bit of them. So there's too crowded here. Kinetic energy is here. So much bumping here. Then they want to get out so they can have more space here. So diffusion is always from an area of a high concentration gradient to an area of a low concentration gradient. And here, pressure, from an area of a high pressure to an area of a low pressure. And electrochemical gradient. So that's not only chemical gradient where there's more of these guys outside here and less here. There's also electrical, so more positive out here and less positive. So now the movement is not only based on the number. There is like 100 positive molecules outside and 20 inside. So they're going to move down this direction. It could also be because the charge. There is a lot more plus outside than inside. So they're going to move because they want to make equilibrium. So the movement is always to try to achieve equilibrium. And that's heat. So heat moves from your hot body, from your where there's a lot of vasodilation, from where there's too hot to where it's colder, and that's where the sweat is, where there's sweat. Okay, and the rest of this is just for you guys to appreciate what's an acronym. This is just like the beginning, like all the Metrodora stuff and all of that. That stuff is just for you to but we're gonna talk more next week about diffusion. We're gonna talk a lot about diffusion. So you need to master the concept of diffusion some more. In medical imaging, we use the radiography for diagnostics, and sometimes we use angiography. We take sometimes solutions that help that they glow, and they were able to see with them. We, we can see better. And there's a CT scan. That's our CAT scan. That's computer tomography. And they send low intensity X-rays. And then there is magnetic resonance imaging, which is we would have superior quality to CT scan, but no X-ray exposure. And don't think that they are in order of which one is best. Sometimes it depends on the condition. Sometimes an X-ray is better than a CT scan. Sometimes a CT scan is better than an MRI. Sometimes the MRI is better than all of them. Okay. So this assesses the metabolic state of the tissue. Positron emission tomography, PET scan, and inject radioactively labeled glucose, and the image color shows tissue using the most glucose at the moment, and damaged tissues appear dark. Then we talked about sonogram with high frequency sound waves echo back from internal organs, and that avoids the harmful X-rays. Okay, that is the sonogram, and you can see the baby already. Okay, what is this? We are done. Okay, we are done. I'm going to stop here and